Hi, it's Lippy, and I'm here with you today in front of the beautiful Shaolin Church in Goa. And this video is about 5 types of emotional wounds. If you recall my last video, I had spoken about how emotional wounds exist energetically. And in this video, I will cover a few of those wounds, specifically 5 of those wounds, and what type of wounds are they? What are the wounds that I was talking about earlier? So number 1, abandonment. Now, abandonment is usually something that people associate with being physically left by someone, specifically in this case a child or a young person who has been left by a parent or a caregiver or a parental figure. And of course this is correct. Abandonment does refer to the physical act of leaving a loved one, but it's more than that, because you can also be emotionally abandoned. You may have a situation where the child is deeply cared for in some ways, but is also, or maybe the child is cared for, has a roof over its head, has enough food to eat, goes to a good school, but there may be emotional neglect at home. And if this is the case, then the child will still experience a type of abandonment. So it's not only the child being left by a parent that accounts for abandonment, it's also being left emotionally, or alternatively it could, a child could also experience abandonment if the child is not recognized for who he or she is. So children have, it takes a little while for children in their developmental stages to form an identity, and for a really long time the identity of a child is closely tied up with the identity of the parents. However, it is the duty of parents to give the child a chance to develop and experience its own identity. And when this doesn't happen, it can also lead to a type of abandonment. Now, when I say wound, I had referred to this in another video where I explained that wounds occur when an emotional process is left incomplete. So if you have a situation where you needed to express a certain emotion, or you needed to complete a certain emotional process, and that didn't happen, you will then have this stuck emotional energy or thwarted emotional energy, which then later becomes an emotional wound. So when I talk about the abandonment wound, this is what I'm referring to. I'm referring to a deep emotional feeling that you may have experienced as a child, and this feeling or these feelings could not be processed and therefore left a wound in its place. Abandonment, by the way, is a core wound. So when I say it's a core wound, it means that it is probably the deepest, most primal wound that we carry as humans. And the fear of abandonment is an universal experience. We all have it. In fact, in my experience, I have seen that the fear of abandonment is actually the fear of death. And we all carry that fear in our subconscious. So this is the reason why the core wound of abandonment and the fear of abandonment are responsible for creating several conditions, which I'm going to get into in a minute. In fact, I would say that they are at the base of most of our neurosis or our basic human conditions, which cause us a lot of difficulty later in life. And these conditions could range from a variety of inner turmoil, which includes low self-esteem, low self-worth, The abandonment wound is also connected to other wounds. For example, the inadequacy wound. Now, what is an inadequacy wound? So I'll just share my own experience with you here. I experienced my inadequacy wound for the first time a few months ago when I was evicted for a variety of reasons from my home. I lost my home, and of course most people in my situation would be in a state of complete panic and very emotionally upset, which I was. However, I also noticed that there was this part of me that came forward when I was exposed to this situation, and that part of me was someone or something that felt that there's no way I can handle this, there's no way I'm going to be able to get through this, I'm going to be out in the streets, that there's no place for me, that I won't be able to create a place for me, and so on and so forth. And it's interesting because when I actually sat down and calmed myself and looked at this piece of me, I realized that it was very strange to have this feeling when the truth is I look back at my life and I've handled all kinds of things. I've handled all kinds of crises, and given that I have handled all kinds of crises, how come I still have this inner being that is so panicked and so afraid that I will not be able to cope with whatever life throws at me next? And I realized that this was my inadequacy wound talking. So the inadequacy wound is also an offshoot of the abandonment wound, because basically somewhere you can end up, if someone you care about and someone you really love either physically leaves or emotionally checks out, or doesn't or fails to acknowledge who you are as a person, it leaves you with feelings of worthlessness, feeling bad about yourself, feeling like you're not good enough, and there is an inadequacy that may arise from this, and therefore an inadequate or inadequacy wound is also connected to a feeling or fear of abandonment, and also an abandonment wound. There's several other conditions that will occur or may occur in your life as a result of having unhealed abandonment wounds, and one of them is relationship difficulty. So if you have abandonment wounds which are very deep, which are untreated, which frankly you are not even aware that exist, they can create havoc in your relationships. And the havoc would come in the form of either you become overly needy or clingy because you fear abandonment so deeply that you will do anything to hold on and cling on to your partner, which can make it very difficult and very suffocating for your partner. Or you may go in the opposite direction and you may play aloof. You may run from intimacy. You may do everything you can to avoid intimacy because you're so afraid that for you getting intimate and getting close means eventually being abandoned. Many people who come to me, many of my clients, when we go deep into their life issues and we try to understand why they're facing the problems they're facing currently, and I sometimes realize that perhaps we're dealing with an unhealed abandonment wound. When I mention this to my clients, they say to me, they're like, what are you talking about? I don't feel low self-esteem. I don't feel worthless. I don't feel this abandonment that you speak of. And they're right, because a core wound is not something you can feel offhand. So if you have a core wound of abandonment, it's not like it pops up every day and is part of your how would you say, your day-to-day conscious life, and therefore you may not even realize that you have it unless it is triggered. And when it is triggered, I realize that it creates certain sensations by which you can recognize it. And one of the sensations is that you may feel complete panic when you are faced with a situation where somebody who you care about, somebody who you love, or somebody you look up to, a partner, a friend, it could be anyone, or even a group that you may belong to, and suddenly you're faced with a situation where they either leave physically, or they check out emotionally, or they ignore you, or they, you know, do something that makes you feel like they don't care about you anymore. You can go into a complete panic if you have deep emotional abandonment wounds. And in some cases it may even feel like, oh my god, I'm gonna die, if this happens, I'm gonna die. The abandonment wound may also feel like, if you're a very sensitive person, and you can feel, you're a highly somatic person, and when I say somatic, I mean you can feel body sensations very, very strongly. You may even feel hollow gaps in your solar plexus, like as if there's part of one area where you simply don't exist. Yeah, there's a hole there. And once again, this is an experience of your abandonment wound. I'm not saying that everyone experiences the abandonment wound in the same way, because we are also different and we're also unique, but generally these are the kind of feelings that may, when you have feelings like this, it may be a sign that you are indeed touching your core abandonment wound. The second wound that we're going to look at is deprivation. Now it's very interesting because most of us did not really get what we needed in the early years of our life. Now I know that for some people this statement may sound almost blasphemous, because they're like, what do you mean? I mean, I had wonderful parents, they put me in the best school, they put food on the table every day, they sat through my football game or my choir recital or whatever. But you know, how can you then say that most people have this deprivation wound? Well, the truth is that as a child we have several needs, and we may not even realize the amount of needs that we have. I'm actually going to be doing a separate video on needs, because even now I realized that there's so many adults running around with unfulfilled needs, with needs that they don't even know that they have, and it causes havoc in their life. It creates all sorts of problems, and they're just not aware that, you know, this neediness that they have, or this hunger that they have that is never satisfied, is actually coming from unmet needs. So the most severe type of deprivation may be something as severe as you were brought up in a home where even your basic needs weren't met, so you didn't have your food, shelter, clothing. The next level is your emotional deprivation. So in really worst case scenarios, you have children that were brought up without the basics, without the food, shelter, the proper clothing, and they were also emotionally deprived. They were not taken care of or handled, keeping in mind that they are separate beings with their very own needs. But you can also have more subtle ways in which you were deprived, and that could be something as subtle as just imagine a scenario where you make this your first sketch, and you come running into the living room, and there is daddy sitting there reading a very important office report, and it's nobody's fault. Daddy's also busy, he needs to get this office report done, and you're really excited because you've made the sketch for the first time, and you go running and you're like, daddy, look at my sketch. And daddy barely looks up from his report, because he's got to get this report done and it's urgent. And in that moment you are deprived of your approval from your father in that moment. Now it may not seem like much, but if you have several such incidents that occur regularly during your childhood, you may well end up with what we call an emotional deprivation syndrome. Now, how does emotional deprivation show up in your day-to-day life? As I said, deprivation is also a core wound, so you may not feel core wounds immediately. If I ask you to feel your deprivation wound, you're going to be looking very hard, because it won't happen that way. But when it gets triggered, you do feel them. And the deprivation wound can come across as a feeling of extreme neediness when you know, this could happen in a relationship where you're with someone and you know they're a good person, they're trying everything they can to make you happy, but somewhere you feel that the more you have from them, the more you need from them, and it seems like a bottomless pit, and you know there's no end to the need, and it just goes on and on and on. And you can experience this as a compulsion to have needs met, or even a feeling that even after your needs have been met, it's not enough. Another way you could experience a deprivation wound is when you are not able to get in touch with your needs. Now this is very interesting, and as I said, I'm going to be doing a separate video on this. If I ask you a question and I say, tell me your top 5 needs. What is it? What are your top 5 needs? What do you need the most in your life right now? And if you have difficulty answering that question, there are very high chances you have a deprivation wound, because one of the defense mechanisms we have within us is that if we see as children that our needs are not going to be met, or some of our needs are not going to be met, the psyche is very, very protective of us. So what it does is it just simply shuts off those needs. So the needs are still there, it just simply shuts you off from feeling them. And if this goes on over a long period of time, you may grow up without realizing what those needs are anymore. You had those needs, you felt them at some stage, but you realize that we're not going to be fulfilled, and now you don't feel them anymore. So if I ask you this question and I say, give me your 5 needs, what do you need? People are very, very good at telling you what they want, but when it comes to needs, you find that it's very difficult for them to come out even with 5 needs. Okay, now another thing that may happen if you have a deprivation wound is you may be in touch with your needs, but you may feel really ashamed about having them fulfilled. And I've seen situations like this where I met somebody once and they were upset about something in their life. It was, if you look at it from a very logical point of view, what they were upset about was not very major, but to their emotional self it was major, and it needed a release. It needed to be handled. And when it wasn't handled, I asked them, I said, what happened? You were upset about this, but you're pushing aside. And they turned around and said to me, they said, well, there's so many horrible things in the world, and there are people who are starving and they're not, getting the food that they need. Sorry, just one moment. I'm so sorry. This is yours? Yeah. Do you want me to leave? Actually, I'm making a video. Can I finish it? Or do you want me to leave right away? I can't hear you. Is 10 more minutes okay? Or 10 more minutes is okay? I'm actually making a video. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. It's okay? Yeah? 10 minutes. Thank you. So sorry. Thank you. Sorry, I was using somebody's cart and they now need the cart. So coming back to when I asked them, I said, what happened? Like, you were really upset about this. You don't want to talk about this anymore? And they said, well, the reason we don't want to talk about this anymore is because there's so much going on in the world. There's so much negativity, and my situation is not half as bad as, say, the children starving in Africa, or the poverty we experience on a daily basis. So it's okay. I'm just going to be grateful. I'm just going to be happy for what I have, and nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong in being grateful. There's nothing wrong in feeling happy with what you have. But even if something is minor, that doesn't mean you should neglect your needs or should neglect an emotion that's trying to come up simply because the rest of the world is also suffering, because that doesn't help the world, and it definitely doesn't help you. And moreover, it is a sign of a deprivation wound, because you feel so ashamed of your needs that you will find any way to push them away when they come up. The third wound that I'm referring to today is shame. Now, shame is a very, very powerful wound, and some Unfortunately, some people may even have what we call a highly shamed core. Now, the shame that I'm referring to here is toxic shame. This is the kind of shame which is this is not the same as embarrassment. It's not the same as guilt. Okay? This is not the kind of shame that comes up when you've done something and you say, "Oh dear, I made a mistake," or I did something I shouldn't have done. This is the kind of feeling that comes up when you do something that may or may not be bad, or may not be harmful, but the feeling that accompanies it is not "I did something bad." The feeling that accompanies it is "I am bad." So it is basically this feeling of being a very flawed, bad person. And this kind of shame is what we call toxic shame. Now, shame, by the way, is a master emotion. And when we say it's a master emotion, what we mean is that it can actually bind your other emotions. So let's take an example. Let's say when you were growing up, you were shamed constantly for throwing tantrums or getting angry. Now, children are very straightforward with their emotions. So unless they're taught otherwise, if they feel something, they will express themselves quite fluidly and quite naturally. And if they get shamed for that, if they're shamed for expressing their emotions, particularly anger, they will grow into an adult who then holds that anger. The anger will be tightly bound in shame. And when you ask them if they're angry about something, they'll say, "Me? No, I'm not angry. No problem. Go ahead. Do whatever you have to do. Don't worry about me. I'm a very cool person." And inside, there's seething rage, but it's bound up so tightly in shame, and they feel so ashamed to ask for their rights. They feel so ashamed to be angry that they will actually suppress anger and whatever other emotions they have been shamed for. Now, what shame can cause in your life is two very, very toxic conditions, and one of them is people pleasing. So if you have a very shamed core, you may end up becoming a people pleaser who would push their own needs down just to make other people happy, because you feel so bad about yourself. You don't feel worthy enough to stand up for your own needs and your own rights. Or you may become someone who's over responsible. So you could, if you have a very shamed core, you could end up becoming someone who works very hard, yet will not give themselves credit, who is constantly trying to make it, because some part of you just feels like such a bad person that the only way to overcome that is to constantly be trying to prove that you're not a bad person. Unfortunately, toxic shame may also be responsible for some personality disorders, such as narcissistic personality disorder. That's a whole video by itself. But basically, untreated toxic shame can cause havoc in your life. The fourth wound that I'm going to cover today is shock or trauma. Now, shock or trauma occurs when we are unable to access one of our four responses. And we have four responses to danger. It's either fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. I'm going to do a separate video on trauma. But when we're not able to access these four responses properly, when we're not able to complete a process when we are in danger in any way, then we can end up storing that event as a trauma in our brain. And I think I'm gonna have to cut this video short because somebody's waiting to start their car. So I promise you I will cover trauma very deeply in another a separate video. But basically, if you have shock or you have trauma, you may suffer from a variety of symptoms later in life, such as post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety or panic disorders. And again, they can lead to further wounding. They can lead to a lot of mistrust of the world, because you're so traumatized, you don't feel safe in the world. So you constantly, when you don't feel safe, is because you can't trust that the universe will look after you. Number 5, and my last wound that I'm going to talk about today, is the engulfment wound. Now, engulfment is almost like it's like the flip side of the coin of the abandonment wound. So the abandonment wound is when someone either emotionally or physically leaves or checks out on us, and the engulfment is when somebody, especially a caregiver or a parent figure, become so excessively close that they smother us to the extent that we fail to exist, we cease to exist. It's almost like they end up seeing us as an extension of themselves. There is a term that is known as the emotional incest syndrome, which is now being studied quite vastly in the field of psychology, and it refers to this kind of engulfment. Now, if you have an engulfment wound like this, you will find that you either run from intimacy, or you will find that you get intimate for a little while, but then you suddenly find yourself becoming indifferent. Suddenly you just can't feel the same feelings that you had for the person you're being intimate with, and you can just become very detached and feel very indifferent as well. And these are all defense mechanisms, because when you have an engulfment wound, there are memories associated of you being engulfed and totally taken over by another person. So now when you try to come close to someone, there is this fear that you will be completely smothered and taken over, and it could result in these kind of conditions in your life. I am going to end this video now, because I really have taken up a lot of time, and this is somebody else's cart on which I'm balancing my camera, so I have to go. But I promise you I will get back with more details about these wounds. I would also like to share with you an amazing book that you can read if you'd like to know more about emotional wounds. It is really the definitive work on emotional wounds, and it's a book called Stepping Out of Fear by Krishna Ananda, or Tom Strobe. Krishna Ananda is his sannyas name. I wish you all the best. It's been wonderful making this video, and I will speak to you soon. Thank you and goodbye.